Good evening, welcome to Scotland at 7. I'm Gordon Ross. It is the 18th of March today. On tonight's programme, I have a familiar face, first of all, to introduce to you as my first guest, and that's Siobhan Tolland, political and disabled children's activist, Siobhan, if I remember correctly.
No, I don't think university students have bearings, but
Oh,
yeah,
sorry.
you know,
No, I don't know where I got that from.
I don't know
I'm,
either.
I'm mixing you up with someone else. Anyway, welcome back, Siobhan, anyway, whatever you're doing. Also joining us this evening is Greg McCarra, of the Trades Unions Group of the SNP, former Midlothian SNP councillor, and we've just heard tonight also now to be on the list for the SNP at the next election. So welcome to the programme, Greg. He's frozen.
Yeah.
Well, he did say that he had a slightly unstable link this evening. Anyway, let's get on with the show. First of all, the coronavirus update. As of 2 o'clock today, a total of 1,760,381 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government regional testing centres since the start of the pandemic. Of these, 1,548,527 have been confirmed negative. 211,854 have tested positive. There are 624 new cases of COVID-19. This will be an underestimate of the number of cases, as not everyone with the virus displays symptoms and not all those with symptoms will be tested. There were 72 new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. The number of patients in Scotland who've died from complications caused by COVID-19 infections now stands at 7,536. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 405 were in hospital last night, 38 of whom were in intensive care. As of 8 o'clock this morning, 2,023,002 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination, and 192,100 had received their second dose. The UK's latest daily figures show that 125,926 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have now sadly died from their illness, an increase of 95 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just in hospitals. Just before I press on with the news, let me just welcome Greg McCarra. Gary, your link is back up again, Greg, so welcome to the programme. No, wait, he's dropped out again. That's going to be an interesting programme tonight. Okay, let's press on with tonight's main news. And the NHS Louisa Jordan Hospital is to close. The hospital, set up to support Scotland's response to the coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, is to close on the 31st of March, with the mass vaccination centre relocating to the SSE Hydro. Thanks to the public's continued efforts to reduce the spread of the virus, the NHS Louisa Jordan was not required to treat COVID-19 patients. Since July 2020, the hospital has played a crucial role in supporting the remobilisation of NHS Scotland. With NHS services remobilising across the country, NHS staff at the Louisa Jordan will return to their own health boards or support the vaccination programme at the SSE Hydro. The Scottish Events Campus will be returned to a working events and conference centre, including preparing to host COP26. By the 31st of March, staff at the hospital will have carried out more than 32,000 outpatient and diagnostic appointments. They'll have trained over 6,900 healthcare staff and students and vaccinated approximately 175,000 people across the Greater Glasgow and Clyde area. The site has also supported the Scottish Blood Transfusion Service, with over 500 donations being carried out, as well as providing occupational health services for the University of Glasgow for nearly 1,000 people. Once relocated to the SSE Hydro, the centre will continue to run daily clinics with the ability to administer a minimum of 4,000 vaccinations each day, with a capacity to scale up to 10,000. Siobhan, this is another good news story. It seems a strange thing to be celebrating the closing of a hospital, doesn't it? But that is a good news story, isn't it?
Yeah, who'd have thought it? No, it is because, do you remember when the Louisa Jordan was being set up, it was at a time where we were genuinely scared we'd have an onslaught of really ill people because of COVID. And that's what it was designed to do, wasn't it? It's to take the excess of ill people because we were so scared there might be, and preparing for the worst case scenario when
Yeah.
COVID was still early in the process. It feels like a return to a bit more normality now, if that makes sense. So
Yes, I
for
agree
me,
with this.
that is good news. Yeah,
It's-
because it means we don't need it anymore.
And that is surely a vindication of the way the Scottish Government has handled this pandemic.
Um, yeah, probably actually. I mean, yeah, I mean, we're not needing it, so we've managed to control it relatively okay. I mean, the early days maybe not so well, but I think that the zero COVID policy, trying to suppress it over the summer really helped us, I think, in the second wave in the lead up to Christmas. So I think that we've done well in that respect, but there's still so many deaths to mourn, and
Yes,
there's still so many traumas to experience. And if we compare ourselves to maybe New Zealand, then maybe not so good.
of course.
Um,
I was going to
but I
say,
think we were limited. Sorry, I just I'm aware of a kind of statement that Devi Schreeder had made regarding Scotland's COVID response in relation to the UK, and she said that we do have some autonomy, but it's the equivalent of kind of being on a carriage in a high speed train. There's very limited things that we can do within a wider UK context because we're part of that island.
so, but despite those limitations, it seems to have been a success. And having not had to use this emergency hospital,
Yeah,
I think is a
yeah.
testament to the hard work of thousands of NHS workers, because not only have they not used it for its intended purpose, they've repurposed it to take the strain off the rest of the NHS, haven't they?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the NHS staff have been amazing, and but it's also a testimony to the people of Scotland that stuck to the rules, because compliance has been high, and it's not been easy. It's been really difficult, and it's a kind of genuinely a collective effort, I think. But let's thank the NHS staff with a slightly bigger pay rise.
Let's hope so. Yes, that certainly has been earned. That's for certain. I'm not sure. Can we get hold of Greg? Is he still on the line? I'm just
I
waiting
think I'm
to hear.
back now.
You're back now, Greg. You're
Yay!
sorry. Hooray! Listen,
Yeah,
Greg. I wanted to get
but
your.
only for a minute. My tea's on.
Oh, Greg, listen. We've just been talking about the closing of the Louisa Jordan Hospital, which we were just discussing as being a success story, an unusual thing to be celebrating the closure of a hospital.
Yeah, and it was a great idea that we built it. By the way, I think we're awfully chuffed in Scotland that we resisted the temptation that we all be given exactly the same name throughout the whole of the UK. Louisa Jordan was a hero of Scottish nursing. And right to celebrate it. No, we opened it. People from the wrong side of the arguments that I was told were saying it was a waste of time. We didn't need it. And then they were saying it was, we're spending too much money on it. And in fact, what we did was we put something in place to make people safe in Scotland. The fact that we didn't need it was a comment on just how well, comparatively, we've handled the COVID epidemic. That's it. We've done a great job, and it's still there. If at any stage we ever needed it again, hopefully not, then we know how to put that together even more quickly. It's good.
Okay, well, listen, let's move on to our next story now that you're back with us, Greg.
Aye.
Okay, so a new poll shows a majority support for Scotland's right to choose. The SNP remains the most popular party in Scotland, with a 22-point lead over its nearest rivals, according to a poll published by Opinium for Sky News. The poll shows that the SNP significantly ahead on Holyrood voting intentions on 46%, with the Tories trailing 22 points behind on just 24% and Labour on just 20%. The poll also reveals that a majority of Scots, 51%, would support independence. The SNP's deputy leader, Keith Brown, said, "Voting SNP in the coming election will give people in Scotland, not Boris Johnson, the right to decide Scotland's future. Scotland's recovery from COVID must be in Scotland's hands and not those of Boris Johnson, who is hammering our economy with his hard Brexit and who is a threat to our NHS." Greg, let me give this one to you to kick off with. Another poll, as if we needed another one. This is the 23rd poll, which I think shows a majority for independence. There have been a few blips along the way, haven't there, though?
By the way, I'd lost signal again for a second there. I hope you've got me.
We've got you
it's
back,
been blitzed
Greg.
a long
Okay.
way, and of course there will be. Yeah, you get the ups and downs, and we might even see support for a bit because various parties get bounces every now and then, some have dips. The key thing is that going into, hopefully, a referendum by the end of this year, that's my own personal hope, we'll be entering that campaign at a vastly better position than we did in 2014. That's something to be happy about. We'll have some ups and downs. If we get the kind of result that we need in May, then we'll have a date for a referendum announced, I would think, not too long afterwards, COVID allowing, and then that'll concentrate minds and people will have to get off that fence that too many are sitting on and maybe think, do they want to have never-ending Tory rule from London and dismantling of the Scottish Parliament, or do they want to actually just kind of do what grown-up countries throughout the world do and just run their own affairs?
Well,
easy choice.
We shall see, Greg, I guess. Siobhan, the other thing that occurred to me in this report, or actually one of the things that's missing from it, is the fact that support for Scotland's right to choose seems to be rock solid. I think I read 55% in this poll are in favour of an independence referendum, of our right to choose. That surely is a very reassuring figure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, it's the teasing out of the two issues, and I think that one thing that Westminster has done is try to conflate, actually not just Westminster, the kind of Labour Party in Scotland and the Conservatives here as well, they've tried to conflate the two issues together, but the right to choose is something very different. It may lead on that inevitably means the right to choose being independence, but it is two very separate issues at this moment in time. 55% is good. It could be higher, though. 45%, you know, not wanting the right to choose, which is quite interesting. I didn't see that in the poll. I'm not sure whether there was a time frame there, but it is good news, and it does mean that there is just this consistent process for democracy now, and a consistent want for democracy. It's a basic democratic principle, isn't it, of a nation to decide the fate of our own future. So yeah, it is good news. I was a bit struck by the gender, the gendered element of supporting the parties in that poll. There was a kind of quite a big difference with women voting the SNP and the Lib Dems for that matter, but quite a significant drop for women in their support of Labour and the Tories. And I'm kind of quite curious as to what that means, because support for independence in women has kind of risen throughout the years as well. But yes, it could be something like that.
Okay. Greg, just before we leave this particular topic, the right to vote, which Siobhan was mentioning earlier on, it's not just something which Scotland should be aspiring to. This is a right that everyone in the United Kingdom has always had, haven't they? Because we've had the right to choose whether they wanted to be in the EU. Why should Scotland not have the right to decide whether it should remain in a union with England? Oh, I think we've lost the signal again, unfortunately. We'll come back to Greg later in the programme. Let's move on.
The look on his face says it all, though, so...
Yes, he's got that sort of sardonic look on his face when it shows there. We'll come back to poor Greg later on. Anyway, the next story. Michael Gove is to be challenged to come clean over his contacts with George Galloway. The SNP today challenges the United Kingdom Government Minister Michael Gove to declare what meetings and discussions he has had with race-baiting Holyrood election candidate George Galloway. Galloway has been widely condemned after posting a tweet aimed at Scotland's Justice Secretary Humza Yousaf, saying, "Well, Humza, you're not more Scottish than me, you're not a Celt like me." Galloway's tweet has been widely interpreted as race-baiting and displaying the worst kind of Trump-like politics. Despite Galloway's highly controversial political history, he's been reported as having been enlisted by the UK Tory government to help combat rising support for Scottish independence. The Tory Cabinet Office Minister Gove, who has been given control over the campaign to save the failing union at all costs by Boris Johnson, is said to have held private talks with a wide range of notable names, including Galloway. Gove's discussions with the former socialist firebrand reportedly took place shortly after Galloway launched his Alliance for Unity party, for which he is standing to become an MSP at May's elections. They're said to have discussed pro-union strategy as support for independence has grown. Commenting on the relationship, the SNP MSP George Adams said, "The people of Scotland deserve to know what contact the UK government ministers have had with an increasingly unsavoury character like George Galloway." Let's see, do we have Greg back? Is he back? No, I think we're still frozen. It looks like it's just you and me tonight here, Siobhan.
You stood up.
George Galloway and Michael Gove. That's a very unlikely pairing, isn't it? An avowed supposed socialist colluding with an avowed far-right Tory. This is getting ridiculous, isn't it? What is going on with Galloway? Claims to be a socialist, but he's apparently conniving with the Conservative Party.
We live in very strange times, don't we? Where the extreme left and the ultra-right are garnering forces together. I don't think George Galloway's ever been a socialist. I think he's been an authoritarian style of leftist politician, and I think that lends him very, very well to a friendship with the Conservative Party. This is what I think. It's an interesting one because historically it's happened quite a few times in the past where the left and the right have kind of conjoined together at times of crisis. And this is what we've got here, you know, like Jim Sellers and stuff as well. You've kind of got that shift there too, I think. But George Galloway is always been this quite very controversial figure, hasn't he? I think the left kind of owned him, but I think George is an opportunist. He George is for George, you know.
Yes.
And I think that I have to confess, I do kind of like watch him on Twitter and take great pleasure. I kind of goad at him slightly occasionally as well. I shouldn't admit that, but he's quite a kind of he's very archetypal of the kind of Scotland we don't want anymore. Yep. You know, he is so old-fashioned in his politics. It's that loud, macho, male-style firebrand that nobody really wants anymore. Yeah, basically that's what it is. It's and you see that in his style quite a lot. He does not reflect the modern Scotland that I think we're moving towards. I am not surprised by George Galloway's relationship with Gove. I really, really am, because if you look at George's rhetoric these days, it is pro-union at all costs.
Well, let's hold that thought for a moment, Siobhan. I've just seen that we've got Greg back on the line. Greg, so we're talking about George Galloway and Michael Gove and what they talked about in their secret talks. I mean, my memory of George Galloway is that he wanted all these small countries like Palestine, Northern Ireland, he wanted them to, you know, all have their independence, all except Scotland, his own birthplace, supposedly. What is going on with this man that he feels the need to be an agent provocateur for the Tories?
It's not that long ago that he was demanding independence for Scotland himself. And, you know, when he was elected as an MP, he defeated the SDP person who had defeated the Tory. Had taken over from the Tory, and it seemed a bit of a progressive advance for Glasgow, but it was a crying shame. What seemed like a progressive advance for Glasgow is just it's ended up with one person and an ever-expanding ego, and we've got a bit too much of that in politics. If people had a few principles, raise them up a bit, take the ego down a bit, listen to people and what people actually want, then we might have a bit of a better country. But anyway, I saw it very neatly suggested that he'll be slipping out of Scotland through his cat flap in just a few weeks' time.
I think that was Hamza Yousaf's riposte, wasn't it?
It was indeed.
Yes, it was.
An excellent riposte. Just before we leave the subject of Mr. Galloway, he came north in a blaze of glory, claiming that he was going to challenge Nicola Sturgeon to throw him out of Scotland for breaking the COVID-19 regulations. She didn't rise to the bait. Do you think anybody is going to rise to the bait with George Galloway?
George who? Sorry, I've never heard of him, is what the people of Scotland are saying.
Well, let's
That's
hope he.
it.
I was going to say, let's
Yeah.
hope he's as indefatigable as we hear.
Remember it well.
Okay, well let's move along now to our next story this evening, and this is to do with green ports and the bidding process. The Trade Minister, Ivan McKee, has urged the UK Government to provide clarity over the future of green ports in Scotland. The green port model adapts the United Kingdom Government's free port proposals, offering a package of tax and customs reliefs. Operators and beneficiaries will be required to commit to adopting Fair Work First criteria and contribute to Scotland's just transition to net zero. The Scottish Government expected to launch the bidding process for green ports in Scotland this month in partnership with the UK Government. Now, Siobhan, the Scottish Government has taken, I suppose, what is a Tory idea. It's an old idea as well, the idea of free ports, where you give tax concessions and freedoms to businesses which locate near these ports, and basically they don't pay any duties. But the Scottish Government seems to have turned this around, so it makes it contingent on them paying fair wages and treating their staff well and being green. Is this the way to go, do you think, with this idea, rather than making it just a tax break for wealthy companies who exploit people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the kind of fundamental principles of the well-being economy again, isn't it? It's that kind of, it's the encouragement of business to understand that the welfare of, that their interests are also caught up in the welfare of their people. And so for me, it's that balance between the well-being of people also means a good economy. A good economy also means the well-being of people, and the two are absolutely interconnected. So I think it's part of that process. What's interesting, of course, is the Citizens' Assembly talked about wanting something similar as well. That was one of their conclusions, that there would be tax incentives for, companies that did good green practice, good wages, and so on and so forth. So there's certainly a mandate behind that, I think, within Scotland. And I do think that it resets how we think about our economy and how we think about our well-being as well. The economy will thrive on a well-being status because people are happier and healthier, and effectively the whole economy benefits from that. So it's a kind of win-win situation here, I think. So yeah, it's a good start.
Okay, Siobhan, a good start. Have we still got you with us, Greg? Are you still with us?
Yeah, so much to my amazement, yes.
Okay, Greg, before we lose you again, let me put this question to you. The free ports idea works obviously while we're still part of the United Kingdom, but what do you think the advantages of a green ports scheme like this might be if and when Scotland becomes independent? Goodness me, he's in shock there. Greg, are you with us?
Oh, we lost him again.
At the critical moment as well, Siobhan.
Oh, bless.
Greg, can you hear us? Hi, Greg.
I can hear you now, and can you see me as well?
We can. Did you hear the question? Yeah, I was just wondering whether you think the green
I
ports...
heard the question. Yeah. I heard someone. Yeah. A few things. First of all, I think so far we're probably handling a reasonable way, in that if we just...
We seem to be having a lot of trouble with Greg's link at the moment. Apologies for the technical difficulties. We'll get Greg back later on in the programme. Siobhan, maybe you'd like to field the question I was asking Greg there earlier on. Do you think that the Green Ports idea has a future in an independent Scottish state?
I think it's the I think the thinking here is that it will work as an infrastructure for an independent Scotland. So I suppose in the sense that, we were saying by it's a good start, is that's what I meant, that everything for me that's happening now is always, I think, with one eye on building that independence infrastructure. So yeah, I think it is. I think that we need much more incentives like that. I think it's something that we start to build across the board. We want all companies to invest in that kind of well-being for their workforce.
Siobhan, can I ask you another question that just occurred to me there? If free ports are around ports, then that means that inward investment is attracted to a particular area. Now, we know from recent developments at Loch Lomond at Barrow that there was a big inward investment from Flamingo Land, which was most unwelcome by the local people, and thousands of people signed petitions against it. That's the kind of inward investment, presumably, that we don't want to see. We want to see inward investment in places where we need it.
Yeah, and something that's maybe just a bit more in tune with the land, if that makes sense. A flamingo flamingo park always seemed very almost an Americanized imposition in the Scottish land, if that makes sense. So something a bit more organic in that respect. But
it was also in the middle of a national park, which was the thing that appalled everybody so much.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's room for some projects if they're kind of ecologically friendly, if that makes sense. But it just seemed quite bizarre. And I think it's that disconnect that we don't want.
Yeah.
And I think that in terms of the investment, it has to be, it has to engage and it has to embed itself within the communities, and it has to be productive for the communities as well, rather than just that kind of weird flamingo park type structure, where it felt a bit Trumpian, that flamingo park, didn't it? It was just that kind of we'll do it regardless. So we do. I mean, I think that it's all about interconnecting things together now, isn't it? And recognizing that everything is connected now, because I think we've become quite fragmented historically the last kind of 20, 30 years in terms of how we see society and how we think. But it's reintegrating things back together. That investment in a community has to benefit that community. It doesn't have to. It shouldn't just come in, use the resources and leave again. Exactly. Like the kind of multinational structure that we've had for the last few decades. So there is a kind of rethinking about how our economy works.
All right, Siobhan, thank you very much. I'm going to move on now to our next story. Hopefully we'll have Greg back shortly. And the next story involves the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, who's been criticised over her toxic asylum plans. The SNP has demanded the Home Secretary categorically rule out plans to ship asylum seekers to remote island detention centres like cattle, saying that it would be inhumane and could breach international law. The SNP has repeatedly asked for absolute assurance that the UK government would not follow the widely condemned Australian model and process asylum seekers on remote islands, including a letter from the SNP's Shadow Home Secretary to Priti Patel last year. Previous reports had suggested Scottish islands had been considered. Madeleine Gleeson, an academic with expert knowledge of the Australian government's asylum policy, said last year in a Home Affairs Committee that any state conventions or any state which considers itself to be a democratic society based on respect for common decency should not be considering the Australian offshore processing model. The proposals to follow the Australian system have been condemned by Amnesty, Refugee Action, the Refugee Council, the Scottish Refugee Council, and the UN representative to the UK, Rosella Pagliucci-Lore. So let's see, have we got Greg McCarra back on the line?
Let's see, maybe you have.
What do you make of Priti Patel's sort of Guantanamo Bay style island asylum seeker detention centres?
Oh no.
Okay, I think I'm back in. Can I say a wee bit? And if you freeze, then fine. I know about. Asylum seekers are given that name for a reason. They're people who are coming from oppressed regimes, and they're trying to make life better for themselves and for their families. And it's something that we in Scotland have had people seeking asylum in here for centuries, actually millennia, to be honest.
Yeah.
Scotland is one of the most genetically diverse countries in the whole world, because the migrating tribes in Europe millennia ago ran into a bit of a car crash in the top left-hand side of Europe. They had no further to go, and all the genes piled up in here. We're a wonderfully diverse country, and we should welcome people from all around the world. As for picking a place to dump people because you don't want them, Westminster has been using that trick for a while. They used the big chunks of the continent of Australia for that and sent their convicts there. But we've moved on, and one of the nice things is that the United Kingdom is kind of running out of colonies. Two of the places that have been talked about, the Isle of Man and Gibraltar. Well, in fact, we've seen in the last week that Gibraltar is now increasingly closely aligned with Spain, to the extent that it's effectively detaching itself from the UK. So good luck in persuading the people of Gibraltar that they should be what Westminster sees as a dumping ground for problem people. I think in Scotland we see it as a welcoming ground for good people who deserve a better life, and we should be able to do what we can for them.
Okay, thank you very much, Greg. It's nice to have you back with us again. I'm going to move on to our next story just now, Siobhan, and we'll bring you back into the conversation in a moment. A review has recommended a specialist rape court for Scotland. Proposals, described as bold, exciting and evidence-based by Rape Crisis Scotland, recommend a national specialist court to deal with rape cases in Scotland. In a wide-ranging review by a cross-justice review group chaired by Lady Dorian, Scotland's second most senior judge, the proposals recommend a specialist court for the most serious sexual offences, using trauma-informed procedures with both defence and prosecution lawyers accredited in dealing with vulnerable witnesses, sentencing powers of up to 10 years and a presumption that evidence by the complainer would be pre-recorded. The review also recommends that complainers have access to publicly funded independent legal representation to oppose applications asking questions about their previous sexual history, and the right to lifelong anonymity for rape complainers being enshrined in Scots law. Campaigners have praised the review, saying that it has the potential to transform the country's response to sexual crime. In addition, the review group, which took evidence from judges, the court service, lawyers, police and victims' organisations, has set out measures to improve communication for complainers with a single point contact who would guide them through the trial process. Now, I need to talk to you about this one first, Siobhan. Now, this is a very important development, isn't it? This is something which I think has been coming for a while. What do you feel about this? Do you welcome this new plan? Do you think this is a good idea?
Absolutely. Absolutely welcome it. I think that I was listening to Amar Anwar on debate night the other night, and he was saying that, the kind of rape conviction rate is so low that it's effectively decriminalised rape, because it's so hard to get a conviction now. And what we've got is a situation that the idea that there is going to be trauma specialists, the idea that there is an understanding of what that might mean for the women is actually a massive step forward. I was also reading as well that everybody involved will go through stereotype training in terms of what rape doesn't mean. So it will come from that evidence-based, and it will come from knowledge, and will not be based on that kind of stereotype process of she asked for it, which is the common one, what the woman was wearing, etc. Oh well, she did this, so therefore it leads to that. So it's a massive leap forward, I think, and I think it's another example of good practice. It's also another example, I think, of embedding human rights in our legal structures. I know we were talking about that just the other week,
yes, just
recently. And I think that's massively important. It's massively important in terms of just protecting women. Women have had a terrible couple of weeks, if you think about it, yes, in terms of violence against women. So this has come at a really timely point, I think, that can offer support and actually, more importantly, fair conviction.
Yes, and the chance of convictions, and perhaps taking some of the fear out of the process for the victims.
Yes. Yeah,
okay,
rape. It's been a well-known thing that one of the things that many victims say is that the trial is just as traumatic as the sexual assault itself, and we can't have that. And I think that takes a good step forward in taking that away.
Okay, Greg, are you with us again?
Yes, Gordon, I'm looking forward to the day when, in debates of this sort and important subjects of this sort, that men and women start at broadly the same point and then finish at broadly the same point. I don't think it's coming as soon as I would like to see it. But what I mean by that, in finishing at the same point, it would be good if men and women were to agree that new legislation to look after whatever sector of society, they would agree that this was a good idea. And
we appear to have lost the end of Greg's statement there, but I think we got the gist of it, Siobhan. What I was going, Greg, are you back?
Yep. Yes.
Greg.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Can you hear me?
I had one other question for you, Greg. Well, we still got a live link to you. Do you feel that there's perhaps a need also for more female barristers and representation in the court system itself?
Yes, society ought to look like itself. Each sector in society should be broadly representative of the people who make up that society, and that means all the institutions, all the components of it. It's good to see that women are now the majority in the legal profession, but it's still the lower ranks of it. Let's move it up a bit.
Okay, yeah. Greg. But listen,
yeah.
Greg, I'm going to stop you there so we can move on to our next story. Hopefully you'll stay with us.
Sure.
And the next story. Okay. The European Medical Agency has recommended the use of the AstraZeneca vaccination. The EU's drug watchdog said today that it remains convinced that the benefits of AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine outweigh the risks following an investigation into reports of blood disorders that prompted more than a dozen nations to suspend its use. European Medicines Agency Director Emma Cook said that the watchdog could not definitively rule out a link between blood clot incidents and the vaccine in its investigation into 30 cases of a rare blood clotting condition. But she said in a briefing, the clear conclusion was that the review was that the vaccine benefits in protecting people from COVID-19 with the associated risk of death or hospitalisation outweighs the possible risks. The agency will, however, update its guidance to include an explanation about the potential risks of both the patient leaflet and the information for healthcare professionals, she said. This is a safe and effective vaccine, said Cook. Greg, let me come to you first in the hope that your link will stay open for us. Now, there's been a bit of politicisation of this vaccine, hasn't there, because it originated in Oxford. Do you think that has played any part in this knee-jerk reaction from several countries who decided to suspend its use, or are they just being safe?
I thought I'd frozen there again, but I'll talk anyway. The Oxford part of it is just a piece of silliness. Oxford was heavily involved in its production, just as Belgium has been involved in other ones, and quite a lot of the actual physical production of these vaccines is coming from India and so on. But overly dramatising the geographical location aspect of it. Mm-hmm. The stushy that we're having just now over the way that the EU has been handling it, I'm a very strong supporter of the EU. I see myself as a Scottish citizen and a European citizen. However, I think the EU has made some mistakes, and some of the nations within Europe have on this as well. It's been overplayed.
Yeah, I think we've lost Craig again, unfortunately. Siobhan, do you want to take up the slack for a moment? Do you think that the risks of the vaccine have been overplayed?
He's back again.
Oh, Greg, sorry. I beg your pardon, Greg.
Yeah.
Would you like to finish what you were telling us?
I think I was strong black screen there, yeah.
So, yeah, you said overplayed and then went.
I'll try not to take to absolutely. And
it's going to be one of those nights, isn't it, Siobhan?
Than we see in Westminster, I have to say.
Dear, oh dear.
Oh, bless.
Oh. Okay, we're not going to manage to get Greg back very easily, Siobhan.
No, I don't think so.
But what Greg is saying about the European Union having made a bit of a muddle of their COVID vaccination programme, it is a very big organisation, the European Union, and it has 27 members. It must be much more difficult to organise something at that scale.
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think that we're all making mistakes. I do confess, though, I do feel slightly uncomfortable about this process of, the European Union having to manage the vaccine as well as the UK, because I think Scotland's been subject to that same kind of narrative from Westminster. Yeah. Because let's face it, the vaccine is the only pretty efficient thing that Westminster's done since COVID started. And there's been a real push, why aren't you doing like we are? Because look at us, we're great. We've been subject to that as well. So I'm always slightly uncomfortable with that. I'm also slightly uncomfortable with the kind of maybe the allegations that it's something to do with the fact that it's Oxford, given that one of the things that was promoted quite consistently was this is how great Britain is. So I do think there's an element here, if it fits into an anti-European narrative and a pro-British nationalist narrative, actually, that, how dare they criticise the vaccine. So I'm kind of looking at it from a slightly different perspective. I think that the European Union has been slightly overcautious in terms of the blood clots and so forth. And I think that they have been quite slow in obviously putting out the vaccine as well. But at the same time, if you look at countries like Germany, they've been also quite good in controlling the virus anyway. I mean, Italy aside. But, so there's ups and downs in that process as well. So I can't remember who it was. Is it Lorraine someday on Good Morning Britain or something like that? And they were getting into this real narrative about how disgraceful it was that the European Union are saying this about the vaccine. I thought, well, that's what makes me uncomfortable, because to pitch it into a kind of anti-British narrative, I feel quite uncomfortable with that, actually.
Yeah, I think that goes back to the subject of racial baiting that we were talking about earlier on.
Yeah, actually it does, yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm afraid we have to move on. Greg, hopefully you'll be able to catch up with us in a minute. Our next subject is supporting Gypsy and traveller communities. Up to £20 million will be invested to provide more and better accommodation for Gypsy and traveller communities. This funding, part of Scotland's first long-term national housing strategy, will enable local authorities to improve existing sites and to expand provision over the next 5 years. This builds on £2 million allocated to site improvement in 2020-2021. It comes as the timeline to complete a range of actions for the Gypsy Traveller Action Plan has been extended by 18 months due to the impact of coronavirus restrictions. This includes continuing work to improve access to public services such as health and education, better engage with members of the Gypsy and traveller community, and to tackle the negative attitudes towards them. Greg, the Gypsy and traveller communities are I think, largely ignored most of the time, aren't they? They're almost invisible until they turn up in your town, and then everybody starts to feel all suspicious. Isn't it about time they had some help? Do you know what? I'm just looking at a photograph of Greg there. Siobhan, are you still with us as well? Okay, we haven't lost you.
I am. You can't get rid of me.
Okay. Well, okay, so the traveller and Gypsy communities have historically been shunned by most sort of conventional communities or regarded with suspicion. But surely they have the same rights as everyone else to decent housing and access to the services we all expect.
Of course they do. And I think that this is interesting because tonight we've got two examples of embedding human rights into practices now, haven't we? And I think that this is treating communities who live and exist differently with the respect and the rights and the right to housing, the right to good treatment, like the rest of us would expect as well. Travelling community has a very rich culture as well. They kind of influenced our song culture. The folk revival, a lot of the traveller community was involved in that as well. So it comes from a very, very rich culture. And what we need is to rehumanise that process, and it keeps coming back to that, I think that this is what the Scottish Government are continually trying to do, is offer humanity and human rights to people that have kind of been marginalised in society. If we look at the comparison to that and Priti Patel's new law, of course, where it begins to decriminalise the Gypsy culture, Gypsy and traveller culture, then we're looking at two very, very different trajectories again in terms of human rights.
Okay, Siobhan, thank you very much for that. Just at this point, we've just been handed a report which has just come across the desk, in fact, that the The Parliamentary Committee, which was looking at the allegations that the First Minister had misled Parliament over the government's botched sexual misconduct probe into Alex Salmond, the MPs have concluded by 5 votes to 4. The committee found that the First Minister gave an inaccurate account of her meeting with her predecessor during the live investigation. Now, a spokesperson for... It's not finalised at the moment, but a spokesperson for the First Minister has also said the First Minister told the truth to the committee in 8 hours of evidence and stands by that evidence. It's clear from past public statements that opposition members of this committee had prejudiced the First Minister at the outset of the inquiry and before hearing a word of her evidence. So this partisan and selective briefing before the committee has actually published its final report is hardly surprising. The question of the First Minister's adherence to the ministerial code is being considered independently by James Hamilton, and we expect to receive and publish this report soon. So that just in this evening. Sorry, it's not a report. This is just... Okay, this report is not public, so it's not an official report. It's not been published, I beg your pardon. So this is obviously a story which is ongoing. We will, of course, bring more to you as soon as we have it. Okay, let's move on to our next story, since time is precious this evening. And this is additional funding for Scottish councils. Local authorities will receive an additional £40 million to support local communities. Public Finance Minister Ivan McKee has confirmed. This takes the total funding package the Scottish Government is providing to councils in 2021-22 to almost £11.7 billion. The councils will have autonomy to allocate the extra money based on local needs and priorities. The Public Finance Minister, Ivan McCarra, said, "We are extremely grateful to local authorities for the crucial role they continue to play in maintaining critical public services, managing welfare support and administering key grant funding throughout the pandemic. This additional funding reflects the key role that local government will play as we focus on how to rebuild and renew our communities." Now, first of all, let me find out, is Greg still with us? Can we establish a link? Greg, are you with us? I think we've still got problems there. Siobhan, over to you. So the Scottish Government is providing funding, extra funding to local authorities. And when I first read this, Siobhan, my first thought was, this is going to take a lot of the wind out of the sails of the Conservative plans for the Internal Markets Bill, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think that it's we need to kind of rebuild at a local level, and that's where the local councils are going to need that money, isn't it? And I know that the council have been they've been stretching their budget a lot because of the kind of emergency that we've had over the last year. I think that anything that can maybe just allow us to stave off UK undue interference at this stage is probably going to be a good thing, because we know that the UK are not really. Sorry, I apologise. Westminster are not really interested in helping and supporting a local or a Scottish level, for that matter. We also know that they're going to embark on an austerity agenda. We know that. We know that from the budget. So that's what we don't want to happen. That would be absolutely disastrous at this point in time. So additional money is welcome. I mean, councils, to be fair, have been underfunded over the last few years. So it's maybe helping them claw back some of that, but it stops, I think, desperate councils from really struggling, and desperate people, I think, from really struggling as well.
So you think perhaps it's more of a reflection of the new reality, Siobhan, rather than any kind of political move to outflank the Tories and their plans to directly fund local authorities from Westminster?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes think I'm really naive and just always like to think that it's done for good reasons. But yes, I suppose there is an element of kind of batting back the baton there, I suppose, isn't there? Yes, yeah.
Okay. Well, we can move on to our next story now, and hopefully we'll have Greg back with us in a few moments. And the next story is to do with the A83 Rest and Be Thankful Road and the preferred route corridor, which has been identified. Major progress on all fronts as additional short and medium-term plans at the A83 Rest and Be Thankful and the long-term preferred route corridor for access to Argyll and Bute, the A83 scheme, has been announced. The preliminary assessment of all 11 route corridor options for improving access to Argyll and Bute and for identifying a long-term solution to the ongoing problems of the Rest and Be Thankful has been completed. Following this work and over the 650 responses to the public consultation on the scheme, we're now able to let the public see the preferred route corridor. This is the Glen Crow corridor in option 1 in the recent consultation. The preferred route corridor is more cost effective and quicker to deliver, having significantly less environmental constraints. Now, who do we have to answer this question? Have we got Greg back yet? Greg, unfortunately, has left us, I've just been told. So it's just you and me this evening, Siobhan. Poor old Greg is having trouble with his internet tonight. The BT semaphore service, as somebody just whispered in my ear. The Rest and Be Thankful is obviously well known to many people, particularly in the west of Scotland, as being a route which is traditionally dogged with landslides, particularly in periods of heavy rain. So this, rather than being the Rest and Be Thankful, if this new route's successful, it's more likely to be the Drive On and Be Grateful rather than the Rest and Be Thankful, yeah?
Yeah, maybe actually. It's I have to confess it's not something I know that much about, but I think that investing in kind of decent roads is something that we're going to need as a good infrastructure, isn't it? And we kind of have. I mean, I was doing a wee bit of research earlier on because I didn't know that this was even happening, and I was looking at some of the pictures of the landslides, and you think, oh God, rest and be thankful right enough, because you just literally wouldn't get through. So it is. It's one of those. In building new infrastructure, I think, is what we need to do now, isn't it? It's part of the kind of investment in our country to, get decent services up and going. But what it also does is it invests in jobs and good jobs, and kind of kickstarts that economy going as well. It's one of the kind of classic ways of kind of re-kicking back an economy in a fair way. So all in all, it's a good sign, and I think that the fact that they've tried to make it as environmentally friendly and as possible is good as well.
So would you say, Siobhan, on reflection, that spending Scotland's public money on a new link, which is desperately needed, because Argyll and Bute residents suffer greatly during the winter when that road is closed, to invest this money in Scotland's infrastructure where it's actually needed, rather than wasting billions of pounds on tunnels that nobody wants?
Yeah, I mean, you'd think that would be common sense, wouldn't you? But this is what kind of kills me, really, to a certain extent, is that we have kind of reached that point where common sense solutions sound radical,
They shouldn't, though, should they?
No, exactly, and it's getting back to that process where these are common sense solutions, isn't it? It's reintegrating the geography of Scotland as well, because Scotland's got a really kind of quite a desolate geography, especially in the outer parts, and it's trying to kind of reintegrate that and kind of make sure that just because it's geographically out there, it's not culturally, socially and economically marginalised as well. So yeah, it's a good thing. But yeah, much better than a tunnel for sure,
Tunnel to Ireland that nobody wants, yes. Okay, well, let's move on to our final story this evening, which is that £4.5 million of investment has been allocated for Scotland's historic towns and cities. 4 historic communities across Scotland will benefit from a combined investment of £4,502,575. Historic Environment Scotland has announced today, on Thursday, the 18th of March. The funding, awarded as part of the Conservation Area Regeneration Scheme, or CARS for short, will be shared between 4 conservation areas to help them regenerate and attract further investment in the future. £762,101 will be invested in Dumfries, £1,113,949 in Dunbar, £1,240,000 in Helensburgh, and £1,386,525 in Stirling. Buildings which have been prioritised for works include the B-listed Alhambra Theatre and Arcade in Stirling, and the former Lothian Hotel in Dunbar, which was built in the late 18th century. Each CARS scheme will deliver a combination of larger building repair projects, small grant schemes providing funding for repairs to properties in private ownership, community engagement and education activities, and professional training services and opportunities, all of which will contribute to a sustainable economic community development within the conservation area. The schemes managed by the local authority will last for 5 years, with work commencing in April. So another good news story, Siobhan, to tell the viewers tonight, that these 4 historic towns and cities are going to get money to help preserve their vital architecture for the future. This is great news, isn't it?
Yeah, I really like this actually because I think that it works on so many levels. It works in a kind of community investment. It works in a sense of kind of taking care of our heritage, and that is important. But I think that Scotland as a brand, if you think in terms of our, international brand, is our history, and so kind of invest in that and preserving that and making sure that it is part of who we are and allows us to just kind of push us onto the international stage a little bit better. I think there's for me it seems like there's a bit of an investment into push us in, as an international tourist area, and because it's one of the things that people love to come. They love to come and see our history. They love to come and see the castles. They love to come and see the old buildings and stuff. So there is a real element of that again. But again, it's about community investment and investing on the things that really make them quite unique and remarkable. As towns and villages as themselves, the Alhambra place, and so it's really good. I really like this story actually, and I think that it actually is important to start restoring these buildings and bringing them back to their glory,
And restoring,
it's a
restoring
great
people's
story.
pride in their towns and cities as well, especially when they are being visited by so many tourists.
Yeah, I think so. I think so too. I think that there is that. It's architecture's a funny thing, isn't it? It can often be controversial. It's like thinking of the V&A and stuff, and there was a lot of controversy over that. But I do think that it does it kind of. I mean, I was looking at some of the stuff that they wanted to do, and it's an education programs, but it's cleaning up the kind of the shop fronts and so forth to make them just attractive areas for people to come and visit. And that's not just international. That's kind of we're all going to be doing staycations for the next few years, I think, because of COVID. So it allows us to kind of visit other areas within our own area as well. And I think there is that element of kind of just giving us or giving those towns and villages just that little bit kind of more interest in their own history. I can't remember where it was. It was somewhere in Turkey, and I walked up a hill to this a kind of monument at the top, and then I got speaking to some people in the evening, and they were saying that they'd never been, but it's only for tourists. But it's one of those things where you think that it's nice to kind of have pride in where you live.
It is indeed, Siobhan. And I think that's probably a really nice way to end the programme tonight, to restore people's pride in the places where they live. Sadly, we have run out of time this evening. Apologies for the technical difficulties we had with Greg McCarra's link earlier on. Just to remind you, of course, that we're in the middle of running a major crowdfunder at the moment for Broadcasting Scotland. So if you would like to become a regular supporter of Broadcasting Scotland, you can do so by following the instructions at the bottom of the screen. You can also make an individual donation, or indeed you can volunteer to help us out the studio. But that's about it from this edition of Scotland at 7. Just remains for me to say thank you to my one remaining guest, to Siobhan Tolland, and to thank you, Siobhan, for your help with the rest of the programme. Anyway, from all of us here at the studio, and what's left of us anyway this evening, a very good evening to you.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes?
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
Are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.